Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I lost my little princess, Kale, in May 2019. She was only 7 years old. She had the brightest smile and a laugh that could fill every corner of our home. But that month, everything changed. A sports car, speeding down the road in front of our home, hit her while she was playing near the sidewalk. One moment she was there, laughing and smiling, and the next, she was gone. The days following her death were dark and heavy, filled with a sadness that seemed to seep into the walls of the house. Every room held a memory of her, and although the pain of her absence was unbearable, my wife and I couldn't gather the courage to leave. That was her home, our home. We stayed there, clinging to what was left of her in the empty spaces and the silent hallways. Our house had a large garden, the place where Kale used to run and play, leaving her laughter suspended in the air. After she was gone, that garden became a quiet refuge for my wife and me, a corner where we could feel close to her memory without the overwhelming weight of her absence that hung inside. One night, while we took one of our usual walks through the garden, we walked in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, remembering our little girl. As we passed in front of the house and looked toward the living room window, something caught my attention. A shadowy figure moved inside, sliding back and forth across the window. My heart stopped. My wife saw it too. We both froze, watching, trying to understand what we had just witnessed. The house was locked up, and no one else lived there, just the two of us. We looked at each other in silence and asking the same question: who could it be? We rushed inside, our hearts pounding, and checked every room, every closet, every dim corner. There was no one. Everything was exactly as we had left it, with no sign that anyone had come in. Over time, when we convinced ourselves it must have been a trick of the light, or our imagination, fed by the grief we carried day after day. Still, the image of that shadow left me with an unsettling feeling, a discomfort that settled into my bones. Days passed and life went on in a strange way. Empty, hollow. But a week later, something happened that shook me to the core of my soul. It was night. My wife and I had just gone to bed. The house was silent, as it always was now. But that night, a sound broke the calm, faint at first, a soft, muffled crying that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I felt my blood turn to ice as I listened more closely. My wife looked at me, eyes wide, gripped by the same fear. The crying sounded exactly like Kale. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it couldn't be real, but that sound, so tender, so fragile, was unmistakable. We got up and walked through the house, room by room, desperately searching for the source of the crying. We checked every corner, every place Kale used to play or hide. And just as we reached the last room, the crying stopped. The silence that remained was heavier than ever. We tried to convince ourselves it must have been the wind, or maybe some animal outside the house. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to dismiss the idea that was forcing its way into my mind. Was Kale still there? Somehow. The next night, I stayed awake working on my laptop at the desk in our bedroom while my wife slept. Everything was calm, only the soft hum of the computer accompanying my thoughts. Then, suddenly, I heard something. A light, slow knock on the bedroom door. My hands froze over the keyboard. The knock came again, gentle, almost hesitant. My heart hammered as I slowly turned my head toward the door. Just as it began to open with a creak, there stood a little girl, standing in the doorway. She looked so much like Kale that, for an instant, I wanted to believe it was her. She had the same dark curls, the same small, delicate figure. But when I looked closer, a sickening feeling ran through my body. It wasn't Kale. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, empty, distant, as if they weren't looking at me, but through me. My body went rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I could only stare at her as she stood there, motionless, radiating a disturbing coldness. Then, as if she sensed my fear, her face changed. An expression of sadness and anger formed. A look far too adult for a 7-year-old girl. I don't know how long I stayed that way, petrified before that figure who looked so much like my daughter, and yet was completely different. At some point I must have passed out, because when I opened my eyes, I was lying in bed. My wife was beside me, her face pale, shaking me anxiously. I told her everything, every terrifying detail, every chilling moment. She listened in silence, her face livid but calm. When I finished, she shook her head and barely murmured, "It must have been a dream." But I knew what I had seen. I knew that little girl in the doorway was not an illusion. She was as real as the memory of Kale. The next day, without a word, we packed our bags. We didn't try to explain it or look for reasons. We simply knew, without needing to speak, that it was time to leave. That home that had once been full of laughter and love had become something else, a place inhabited by memories that refused to rest. We left that day, and we never went back. Story 2. It was a cold night in November 2019, around 9 p.m. I was home alone and hoping to enjoy some cozy, creepy entertainment. My parents had left town to visit relatives for the weekend, so I had the whole house to myself. I planned to watch a horror movie and make the most of the solitude. I turned off the lights, left the room completely dark, and set the perfect mood. However, when I went to the kitchen to look for popcorn, I realized there wasn't any left. What bad luck, I thought. I considered watching the movie without it, but the idea just didn't feel right. A horror night without popcorn wasn't the same. The market wasn't very far, only about 5 or 10 minutes on foot at most. I decided it would be fine to go out, even though it was already dark. I grabbed my coat, locked the house, and went outside. The street was quiet, not a single car passing by. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind through the leaves and my footsteps on the sidewalk. The stillness of the neighborhood felt unsettling, too silent. I walked along the main sidewalk, watching the streetlights flicker now and then, as if struggling to stay on. I tried not to look toward the narrow alleys opening off to the sides. Each one looked like a dark, endless tunnel, capable of swallowing a person whole. My mind started playing tricks on me, shaping figures in the shadows, but I forced myself to focus on the warm lights of the market I could already see in the distance. I arrived without any trouble, and the fluorescent glow of the place made me feel safe, even if only for a few minutes. I quickly grabbed a bag of popcorn and paid at the register, not wasting any time. But the moment I stepped out the door, I felt it. Something was wrong. The air had turned colder, heavier. I looked around, but the street was still just as empty. I shook my head, trying to get rid of that strange feeling, and started walking back home. I kept telling myself I was just a little nervous because of the darkness and the idea of the horror movie. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I saw it. At first it was only a silhouette, a tall, dark figure standing beneath a broken streetlight across the road. I couldn't see its face, only the outline of its body. It was completely motionless, in the darkest spot on the street, as if it had been waiting for someone. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just someone waiting for a friend or something like that. But when I walked a few meters farther, I realized it wasn't moving. It was facing me, staring directly at me. My stomach dropped. I sped up, repeating to myself that I shouldn't look back, that I should just keep walking. It's probably harmless, I tried to convince myself, but the silence around me grew heavier with every step. My own heart pounded so loudly I thought I could hear it. My footsteps sounded too loud, too obvious. I felt exposed, like prey. When I finally turned the corner onto my street, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see that it was gone, but it wasn't. It had crossed the road and was now standing at the corner, watching me. My hands went cold instantly. I told myself it couldn't follow me all the way to my house, that it would surely turn around at any moment. But that expression, or what little I could make out of it, didn't seem friendly, not even human. It stayed there, motionless like a statue, staring at me. A deep chill ran down my back. Trying to ignore the growing fear, I hurried forward, almost running as I got closer to my home. But the faster I went, the closer it seemed to be. I turned into my driveway and felt a brief surge of relief at the sight of my house. But when I looked back, the relief vanished. It was there, right in front of my door, only a few steps away, staring at me with unbearable intensity. It hadn't made a sound. It hadn't spoken to me. It hadn't even blinked. It just watched. I didn't dare go inside, not with it so close. On impulse, I ran to my neighbor's house, Mrs. Weller, a kind elderly woman who lived only a few meters away. I pounded on her door in desperation until she opened it. Her face showed surprise and concern. I told her what was happening between gasps, pointing toward my house. She didn't hesitate for a second. She pulled me inside quickly and locked the door. From her window, I carefully looked out, expecting to still see it there, waiting for me. But it wasn't. It had disappeared. The street was empty, just as silent and strange as when I had first gone out. Mrs. Weller didn't waste time. She called the police immediately. I sat on her couch, trembling. With a mix of fear and disbelief, I tried to convince myself that maybe it had all been my imagination, a nightmare that felt too vivid. But something inside me knew that wasn't true. The officers arrived within minutes. They knocked on the door and I told them everything, in great detail. At first they seemed skeptical, but seeing how shaken I was, they took it seriously. They searched the area, my driveway, the corner where I had seen it, the nearby alleys. They looked for almost an hour, shining flashlights into every corner, every bush. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a shadow. Before leaving, one of the officers assured me they would patrol the area as a precaution, but his words didn't reassure me. As I sat in Mrs. Weller's living room, I couldn't stop thinking about that face, or whatever it was that had been there, staring at me, waiting, knowing exactly where I lived. The police never found it. No one else in the neighborhood reported anything strange. Over time, the incident faded, becoming a blurry and disturbing memory. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next horror stories. Your support is important. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 3. This story happened in May 2018. To be clear, I am a woman, which makes all of this even more terrifying. I worked as a babysitter on weekends for a family. It was a freelance job I did because the available jobs in my area didn't interest me. I took care of this family's children for 2 years, a boy and a girl. I loved them very much. I felt like they were almost my own children. Their parents were divorced. The kids lived with their mother during the week and spent weekends with their father. The father was a very busy man. He worked in finance. He was always talking on the phone in his office inside the house while I spent time with the kids. It was obvious he had a lot of money because he paid me $350 every Saturday and Sunday. That meant a lot to me, since I was saving to buy things I wanted in the future. Every time I babysat the kids, it was a pleasant experience, a true blessing, until that night, a night that would mark me forever, and that would make me never work for that family again. It was a Saturday, around 9 p.m. It was already bedtime for the kids, so I tucked them into bed, said goodnight. They slept together in the same room, turned off the light, and closed the door behind me. I walked down the hallway to the kitchen to wipe the counters and wash the dishes. While I was scrubbing, I saw the father come out of his office to my left. He smiled at me and said, "Hi, Mackenzie. Thank you so much for taking care of my kids tonight. They love you. You're like an older sister to them." I thanked him with a smile. He came closer and hugged me. I hugged him back, although it felt a little strange. Still, I knew him well, and I figured it was probably just a friendly gesture. Then he paid me through Venmo. I grabbed my bag, ready to go home, but before I could, another conversation started. This time the subject made me uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I looked at him with a strange expression, let out a small, nervous laugh, and told him no. "I'm surprised," he said. "You're the prettiest girl I've ever seen in my life." I thanked him, forcing a smile, but I already felt very uncomfortable. I tried to hide it and hurried to say goodbye. "Well, I'm leaving. See you later," I said as I raised my hand to wave. But before I could even take 3 steps, I felt his hands on my hips. The man was right behind me. In a soft voice, almost whispering into my right ear, he said, "You could stay a little longer." I froze. I whispered back, "What are you doing?" My voice was shaking. I was more confused than ever. He replied, "Shh, just relax." I asked him to stop, without raising my voice, because I didn't want to wake the kids. "Let me go," I told him, but he didn't let go. Then he went further. I felt an overwhelming fear, a terror that turned me cold. Tears started running down my cheeks. Before he could take advantage of me anymore, I screamed, "Let go of me." And I threw a punch with all my strength. My punch hit him in the nose, which made him let go immediately. I saw him fall to the floor. I didn't wait another second. I ran out of that house as fast as I could, got into my car, and started the engine shaking. I sped off without looking back. As soon as I got onto the highway, I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I told her everything that had happened. She asked if I was okay with the police meeting me at my house, and I agreed. I gave her my address. The drive took about 20 or 25 minutes, and only about 5 minutes after I arrived, I heard knocking at the door. "Police, open up," they shouted. I looked through the peephole to make sure it really was them, and when I saw their uniforms, I opened the door. They came in and we sat down. I told them my whole story, step by step, leaving nothing out. When I finished and they told me they would keep me informed if there were any updates, then they left. Unfortunately, I never heard anything else. I don't know what happened to that man, whether he was arrested or whether he stayed free. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, shaken, after having nightmares about that moment. I got psychological help, although I still don't feel completely recovered. I still think about the kids I used to babysit. I truly hope they're okay, that they grow up happy and become successful in life. I miss them a lot, and I would love to see them again, but more than anything, I hope they no longer live with their father. It may sound dark, but I suspect that after I quit, he hired other babysitters, and that he did the same thing to them, or something even worse. If that's true, I only wish pain and justice for that sick and disgusting a man. Story 4. It was supposed to be a fun day. My friend Peter and I were hiking deep in a forest in Alaska, a place few people ever venture into. We wanted a bit of adventure, something we could proudly talk about when we got back. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the trees, so tall, made us feel tiny, as if we'd stepped into another world. We laughed, took photos, and joked about all those stories of people getting lost in forests like this. We never imagined we would end up being one of those stories. When the sun began to sink behind the treetops, we decided it was time to head back. The shadows stretched across the forest floor, and little by little, everything fell into an unsettling silence. There were no birds, no whisper of wind through the branches, nothing, just a dead calm. We tried to follow the trail we'd come from, but every tree looked the same and every path felt unfamiliar. We were lost. Panic started to take hold of us, and Peter's confidence crumbled. We had no signal on our phones, this deep in the woods. There was no way to call for help. We walked in what we thought was the right direction, but every step seemed to lead us farther and farther in. I checked my watch. It was already late, and the idea of spending the night out there made my stomach turn. That was when, in the growing darkness, I saw a faint light, a flashlight held by a figure a few meters away. I felt immediate relief. Finally, someone who can help us, I thought. Peter and I looked at each other, nervous but hopeful. We started waving and shouting, "Hey, excuse me, we're lost. Could you help us?" But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, holding the flashlight low, lighting up a small circle at its feet. Its head was bowed, its face hidden in the shadows. I thought maybe it hadn't heard us, so we moved a little closer and called out again. But the nearer we got, the stranger everything felt. The way it stood, so rigid, so unnatural, like it was waiting for something. We stopped about 3 meters away, expecting a response, but nothing came. Not a word, not a gesture. A chill ran down my spine. Peter whispered, "Maybe he's hurt," but his tone gave away doubt, fear, and then, out of the darkness, more lights appeared. 1, 2, 3, until there were 6. 6 flashlights switching on slowly, moving toward us. 6 figures emerged from between the trees, forming a circle around us. They all held their flashlights low, just like the first one, with their faces hidden in shadow. Peter and I froze. The silence was so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat. None of them spoke. None of them made the slightest sound. They just stood there, watching us. Or at least, that's what it felt like, that they were staring, unmoving. My throat was dry. My legs trembled, heavy as lead. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. Then, one of them tilted the flashlight just slightly, and the light caught his hand, a pale, rough hand, with dirty nails, like it had been in the forest for days, maybe weeks. That was when I smelled it. Faint at first, but growing stronger as they moved closer. It was a disgusting stench, rotting meat, something that had been decomposing for a long time. My stomach lurched and I had to fight the urge to vomit. Peter grabbed my arm and whispered urgently, "We have to go. Now." He didn't need to say it twice. We started running, breathing hard as branches snapped under our feet and tore at our clothes. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel them. I knew they were following us, that they were close. Suddenly, between the trees, an old cabin appeared, an almost collapsed shack, like it had come out of nowhere. I felt a wave of relief at the sight of it, even though it looked like it had been abandoned for years. We ran to the door and started pounding on it with all our strength. After a few endless seconds, the door opened with a creak. An older man appeared, gray-haired and serious-looking, though there was something kind in his eyes. He looked at us, and when he saw our panic, his expression softened. "What's wrong?" he asked, in a calm, steady voice that somehow managed to soothe us. "They're following us," I managed to say, glancing back toward the forest. "We don't know who they are. They have flashlights, but they don't talk." The man's face hardened. Without saying a word, he stepped back inside and returned seconds later with a shotgun. He climbed onto the porch, raised it into the air, and fired. The blast echoed through the forest, shattering the silence like thunder. For a moment, and everything went still. The lights that had been approaching vanished, swallowed by the darkness of the trees. The man looked at us and said firmly, "Get inside, quickly." We didn't hesitate for a second. Once we were inside, he locked the door and turned off all the lights. He told us to stay quiet and away from the windows. We stayed there in the darkness, barely breathing, listening for footsteps outside, but the forest became completely silent again, as if no one else had ever been there. The man stayed awake all night, watching through the window with the gun in his hands. When morning finally came, he guided us back to the main trail. On the way, he barely spoke. He just watched the trees carefully, as if expecting to see something. When we reached a safe area, he stopped, nodded at us, and turned around, disappearing into the pines without saying a word. To this day, I don't know who those people were or why they were following us, but I do know I will always be grateful to that man in the cabin, whoever he was. Story 5. I've been a truck driver for 10 years. Driving at night has always been my thing. The empty roads, the silence stretching on endlessly. There's something about that stillness that has always felt comforting to me. But sometimes, that same silence can feel different, darker, as if the highway is holding its breath, watching. I never thought I'd say this, but after what happened on the road between Vancouver and San Francisco, I will never look at those long nighttime hauls the same way again. It was around 2 a.m. The road stretched out like a ghost beneath my headlights, endless, broken only by the occasional sign flashing and reminding me how far I still had to go. It was just my truck, the roar of the engine, and me. I stayed awake on coffee and adrenaline, determined to get the load down south on time. Then I saw it. A truck stopped on the left side of the highway, with the door completely open. In this line of work, you don't ignore that. I know how dangerous it can be to get stranded at night. At first, I thought the driver might have pulled over to rest, but the open door, something didn't add up. I felt like I had to stop. I slowed down and pulled closer. When my headlights lit up the cab, my stomach tightened. I recognized the truck. It belonged to my friend Rachel. We'd worked together on several routes, sharing coffee and laughs at truck stops. She was a responsible, experienced driver, not the kind who would leave her truck open in the middle of the night. I parked and got out, calling her name as I walked toward it. When I got close enough to look inside, the air left my chest. Rachel was slumped in her seat, her eyes half open and her face pale. Blood was running from her nose, and a dark stain spread across her shirt. The handle of a knife protruded from her abdomen. Someone had attacked her, I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before I reacted. I climbed into the cab and called her name again. She barely moved, and in a weak voice, almost a whisper, she tried to speak to me. I leaned in closer to hear her. Between short, ragged breaths, she told me what had happened. She had picked up a hitchhiker, a man who looked like he needed help. She didn't think much of it. He seemed harmless, tired, grateful for the ride. But it was only a facade. Not long after he got in, he pulled out a knife and demanded her phone, her wallet, anything valuable. When she hesitated to hand over her things, he showed no mercy. Rachel's hands trembled as she tried to tell me everything. Her voice was thin, barely there, and her breathing kept getting faster. I knew I had to act immediately. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, I tried to explain what had happened. Even though I could barely keep my voice steady, she promised to send help right away. I stayed beside Rachel, talking to her, trying to keep her awake while we waited. The highway was completely silent. No cars, no noise, only the wind cutting through the empty night. Every shadow thrown by my headlights seemed to move, stretch, and stalk us. It was as if the road itself were closing in around us. Finally, in the distance, I saw red and blue lights flashing. The police and an ambulance were coming. A strange relief washed over me when they arrived. The paramedics moved quickly, speaking to Rachel in soft tones as they lifted her onto a stretcher. I watched her being loaded into the ambulance, and for a moment, everything felt unreal. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. Rachel was one of the toughest truckers I knew, but now she looked so fragile, so helpless, clinging to consciousness. While the officers questioned me, I told them everything she had said. One of them, with a serious expression, took notes. He nodded and told me they had seen similar cases. People pretending to need help in order to attack lone drivers on isolated stretches of road. It was something that, unfortunately, had been happening more often. The thought made my stomach churn. After I gave my statement, I called my boss to explain what had happened. He was shocked, but he quickly arranged for another driver to take over Rachel's delivery. I watched them tow her truck, still stained with blood, and saw another driver arrive to continue the job. It was unsettling to see someone else sitting where she had been. But that's this line of work. The wheels keep turning, no matter what happens. When it was all over, I got back into my truck. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. The highway didn't feel the same anymore. It felt strange, hostile, as if it were alive and watching me. I got back on the road, but I couldn't stop checking my mirrors, expecting to see some shadow moving behind me. The rest of the trip was a blur of anxiety. Every car parked on the shoulder, every figure near the road, sent a chill through me. I couldn't get the image of Rachel, slumped over, out of my head, or the officer's words about the man who attacked her. They said they would try to find him, but deep down I knew the chances were slim. In the middle of the night, on a lost stretch of highway, it was as if the guy had vanished, swallowed up by the asphalt. When I finally reached my destination, I realized something. I had learned a very hard lesson, one I wish I'd never had to learn. You can't trust anyone, especially when you're alone, in the dark. The road can look empty and calm, but you never know what's hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, every time I get into my truck, I check the locks, keep my phone close, and watch every face carefully. Because out there, miles from any city or help, you are completely alone. And sometimes, the people who seem to need help are the ones you should fear most. Story 6. I am a woman, and this happened to me in January 2012, when the weather was definitely not warm in Isla Vista, California. It was our first day back after Christmas break and the start of the new university semester. It was around 7:30 in the morning when I walked into a Starbucks with one of my friends, whom I'll call Ella. Ella and I went to Starbucks every day, and we always ordered the same thing, a caramel vanilla swirl iced coffee. That morning, the line was pretty long, but it moved quickly. In front of us was a man with short hair, very pale skin, and a thin build. At one point, he turned for a few seconds when he heard our conversation and smiled at us. I have to admit that smile was disturbing, almost forced. It gave off a feeling of harassment, of something strange. We didn't smile back, and he simply turned to face forward again. When it was his turn, he ordered 2 light hot vanilla lattes. We thought it was weird. He was alone, so why was he ordering 2 coffees? We wouldn't take long to find out the reason, in the worst way possible. Once he finished ordering, he stepped away from the counter. After that, Ella placed our order and we waited. About 3 or 4 minutes passed before one of the Starbucks employees called the man by his name, Elliot. We watched him walk up, pick up the 2 cups, and take the lids off. We didn't understand what he was doing. Suddenly, we saw him jerk his hands and throw both coffees into the air, straight toward us. The boiling liquid hit us directly in the face. We screamed in pain. The burning was immediate. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. I heard his voice, full of rage, shouting, "That's what you get for not smiling back at me. Bitches." And then he ran out of the store, disappearing into the crowd. We stood there frozen, trying to process what had just happened. One of the employees ran over to us and asked if we were okay. I could barely tell him to please bring a cold cloth, because my face felt like it was on fire. He went to get one and came back right away. When I pressed the cloth against my skin, the relief was immediate. The cold helped calm the pain. Then the manager came out from the staff area and approached, concerned. He asked if we wanted him to call the police. We both said we were fine, that it wasn't necessary. He nodded and stepped away. Ella and I didn't go to class that day. We were still shaken by what had just happened. I remember thinking that this man, Elliot, must have been insecure, frustrated with himself. Maybe he thought we were attractive and didn't know how to react when we didn't smile at him. He probably had never had a relationship with a woman, maybe not even much interaction with one, beyond his mother. He seemed like an incel, someone unable to handle rejection. Over time, the incident faded from my memory. 2 years went by, but it all came rushing back in May 2014. That year, I had just finished my second to last year of college, and I'd been living in my apartment since August 2013. One morning, like I did every day, I turned on the TV to watch the news. What I saw made my entire body go numb. 7 people had been shot and killed, and the perpetrator was the same man who had attacked us with the coffees. His full name, Elliot Roger. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my phone and called Ella, telling her to turn on the TV. When she saw the news, she froze the same way I did. She could barely speak. Everything came back to us. The coffee and the burning, his hate-filled scream. In the days that followed, his motive was revealed: misogynistic terrorism, revenge for sexual and social rejection, and an incel ideology. I wasn't surprised. Ever since that day at Starbucks, I had sensed something like that. But hearing it confirmed made my stomach turn. They also announced that Elliot had a YouTube channel where he posted videos filled with resentment. He complained that women only cared about arrogant men and ignored him. He wrote in misogynistic and anti-feminist forums, attacking women online, and he presented himself as a victim, when in reality, He was the one creating the conflicts. Then I learned that it hadn't been his first attack. In July 2011, months before he threw the coffees at us, he had done something similar. He threw iced teas at two different couples in an attack of jealousy because he didn't have a girlfriend. It was all part of a pattern of hatred he had been building up for years. It was discovered that he had been planning the massacre for more than a year. He didn't just kill 7 people. He also took his own life that same day. I remember watching an interview with his father on the news. He seemed to be in complete denial. In my opinion, he knew what his son was like, but he chose not to get involved. He wasn't a strict father and didn't raise him with clear limits. He probably never taught him discipline or empathy. Sometimes, looking back, one thought haunts me. I know it sounds absurd, but I wonder if everything would have been different if we had simply smiled at him that morning. Maybe I wouldn't be here telling you this story, but the truth is that none of that would have changed who he really was. Elliot Rodger was already a monster in the making, and we were just a small footnote in the story of his hatred. Story 7. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I had an experience that I have never been able to forget. Something that made me believe I had met a ghost in my own house. It happened one afternoon while I was sitting alone on the couch watching TV in the living room. Suddenly, my eyes drifted toward an old rocking chair we had nearby. It was moving gently, rocking back and forth all by itself. I remember thinking it was strange, but I tried to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation. The windows were open, yes, but there wasn't even a breeze. Besides, it was autumn, so the air conditioning wasn't on either. Still, I decided to think that maybe the chair was moving because it was old. After a minute, the movement stopped and the rocking chair became completely still. I went back to focusing on my show, trying to put that weird moment behind me. The next night, I sat down on the couch again, ready to watch TV. This time, and without warning, I heard a loud noise coming from the kitchen, right next to the living room. I turned my head and saw a cup on the floor. I didn't see it fall, but there it was, directly beneath the shelf where it was supposed to be. I thought maybe a draft had knocked it down, although it didn't make much sense. I walked over, picked up the cup, and put it back where it belonged. The rest of the night was calm, with no other incidents. The same thing happened the next day, but the third night, things became much more unsettling. I was in my usual spot, watching TV, when, without any warning at all, the old radio sitting on the desk next to the television turned on by itself. The sound burst into the room, filling it completely. I felt my heart drop. I just stared at it, not understanding what was happening. This wasn't like the rocking chair or the cup. A radio doesn't turn on by itself. It had to have been someone, but I knew no one else had touched it. The idea that something invisible had done it filled me with a deep fear, a cold sensation that ran through my body. Terrified, I jumped off the couch and ran straight to my parents' bedroom. I found my mother on the phone. When she saw me, she paused the conversation, noticing the panic on my face. Through tears and shaking, I told her the radio had turned on by itself and that I thought there was a ghost in the house. She looked at me with a mix of surprise and exhaustion, probably thinking it was just my childhood imagination. She asked the person on the other end of the line to wait a moment, took my hand, and walked back with me to the living room. When we got there, the radio was off. The silence was absolute. My mother smiled at me and said calmly, "See, there's nothing here, honey. There are no ghosts." I tried to insist, explaining what I had seen, but she shook her head, clearly not believing me. Then she went back to her phone call, leaving me alone in the stillness of the living room. After that night, Nothing strange ever happened again, but the experience stayed with me for a long time. For weeks, I was afraid to be alone in the living room. Every time I walked past the rocking chair or looked at the radio, I felt a chill, remembering those moments when they seemed to move and act on their own. Over time, as I got older, the fear started to fade. I went back to spending time in the living room, feeling calmer. Still, even today, I can't shake the feeling that something was there with me back then. Something I couldn't see, but that was present. I know many people don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, and maybe that's why my mother dismissed my story that night. But I do believe, even after all these years, I'm still convinced that something unexplainable happened in that living room when I was a child, something I will never forget. Story 8. I spent a decade working as a scoutmaster at a Boy Scouts camp, long before the pandemic changed the world. For 10 summers, we gathered in the mountains, where the air smelled of pine and the horizon seemed endless. Out there, among trees and rivers, the world felt free, wild, pure. Each summer, I guided groups of boys, teaching them how to tie knots, build campfires, and follow trails that twisted through the forest like living veins in the earth. We learned that the only real way to know the woods was by living in them, even if only for a week or two each year. My son came with me every summer, too. He was a thin kid with a huge heart and an even bigger adventurous spirit. I watched him grow there, little by little, with worn-out boots and hands hardened by dirt and work. He learned to stand his ground, to listen closely, to observe before acting. Being out there shaped him, like it shaped all of us. We spent our days hiking, fishing, exploring. Sometimes we'd walk for hours just to find those hidden spots along the river where the fish gathered. And at night, we would lie back and watch the stars. You never see that many from the city. Or sit around the fire telling stories until the flames turned to embers and the boys' laughter turned into yawns. That was how our nights were, one after another, summer after summer, a routine as steady as the mountain itself. But one night in particular changed everything. We were camping on a ridge we knew well, a site we had used for years without any problems. The day had gone as usual, hiking, fishing, and a bit of instruction between games. As evening fell, we lit the fire, and soon the boys gathered around it, their faces lit by the orange glow. That's when I noticed it. The forest was too quiet. All we could hear was the crackle of the fire and the occasional snap of a branch. The trees stood perfectly still, the air thick and heavy. Not even the crickets were singing, and they usually chirped all night. I didn't want to say anything and scare the kids, but that silence was strange, unnatural, like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then we heard it, a low and deep growl, slicing through the silence like a knife. Everyone froze. The boys tensed, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the firelight. The other scout leaders glanced at each other, nervous. The sound was close, too close. Out of the darkness, 2 mountain lions emerged, sleek and powerful, their eyes reflecting the firelight like 2 cold golden spheres. They were bigger than I had imagined, their muscles shifting beneath their tawny coats as they moved silently to the edge of the light. A few boys let out a small whimper. One of the youngest clung to his friend's arm, but no one screamed, no one ran. They stayed still, breathing hard, trusting us, trusting me. The leaders and I didn't move either. We knew one sudden movement could trigger an attack, and with 2 mountain lions, the odds weren't in our favor. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears, my throat dry as dust, but I had to stay calm. I couldn't let fear take over. The boys were depending on us. I looked at the other leaders. and with just a glance we understood. We would hold steady together. The head scoutmaster, Hank, was the first to act. Slowly, with a calm that seemed almost impossible, he reached for the rifle we always kept at camp. We weren't hunters. We never used it unless there was a real emergency. And this was definitely one. With the deliberate movements, Hank raised the rifle toward the sky and fired a shot into the air. The blast shattered the silence of the forest, echoing like thunder. The mountain lions flinched, their eyes gleaming even brighter, their ears twitching uneasily. For a moment they seemed torn between attacking or running. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, they backed away into the shadows and vanished. No one moved, no one spoke. Only the smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixed with fear. I felt my son, sitting beside me, let out a breath he'd been holding. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently, trying to reassure him. When we were sure the animals were gone, Hank lowered the rifle and said, his voice firm but calm, "Well, boys, I think we've had enough excitement for one night." That was enough to break the tension. The boys headed to their tents, murmuring to each other, casting glances toward the forest. They were scared, yes, but they were also thrilled. They had felt the exact edge between fear and wonder, that place where you realize how close you can be to the wild and to what's real. That night, lying in my sleeping bag, staring up at the canvas roof of my tent, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The mountain lions had been so close that I could still feel their gaze, cold and intelligent. For a moment, I had the feeling they had recognized us, as if they understood we were just another part of the forest, another kind of prey. The next morning, we packed up and continued on our way. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but I could see it on the boys' faces. Something had changed in them. They had tasted something few ever get to know, the raw essence of nature, the flavor of the wild. Story 9. I was in 7th or 8th grade when one night I went through an experience I have never been able to forget. It wasn't just unsettling, it was pure terror. And the fear I felt back then stayed with me for a long time. Kids who grow up in the countryside or in mountain areas learn to deal with many things city kids wouldn't even imagine. Wild animals, storms, lonely roads. But when it comes to strange human behavior, that's where we're left without tools. My parents loved card games. They were part of a group of friends who met at different houses. They would bring food, have dinner together, and spend the night playing. I almost always went with them. But that night I was recovering from the flu and preferred to stay home. I settled on the living room couch with a book, covered with a blanket. I asked my mom to close the curtains in front of me because the sun was shining in my eyes. I was weak and getting up felt difficult, so she agreed, which I appreciated. Later, while it was still daytime, my parents left. The afternoon sun filled the house with a golden light. My cat, Whiskers, was sleeping on the back of a chair, enjoying the warmth. My old dog, Julie, was resting on the carpet right where the last rays came in. Everything was peace, silence, calm. I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up suddenly to Whiskers hissing and Julie growling. I had never heard her growl like that before, a low, deep sound that continued even as she breathed. Julie had gotten up and was standing stiff, staring toward the front door. That's when I saw the doorknob move. Luckily, the upper deadbolt was locked. I was still half dazed, not fully understanding, when I heard footsteps moving toward the kitchen window. Whoever it was, they were walking on the porch, and I could clearly hear the crunch of sand beneath their shoes. In that moment, all my sleep vanished. It was already fully night, and the curtains were still open. All of them except the one my mom had closed for me. The only light on was the lamp under which I'd been reading. In the middle of the darkness, I must have looked like a lit-up figure, perfectly visible from outside. I was in a nightgown, and the robe I had on top had come open. I froze, trying to figure out what to do before that person reached the window. I slid off the couch, flattening myself against the floor in the backrest. Back then, we had a cedar chest as a coffee table. I pulled my legs up so they wouldn't be able to see me from outside. Julie started barking furiously, while the cat hid under some piece of furniture. I knew I had to move, because soon I would be visible from the next window. I got up, dizzy, and crossed the living room toward the side where the curtain was closed. I was trying to reach the phone. My dog was now jumping at the window, baring her teeth, barking desperately. But whoever was out there wasn't leaving. That was what scared me the most. I had the feeling he knew I was alone. I didn't know how long he had been watching before Julie started growling. But what terrified me was that not even an enraged dog scared him off. We lived in an isolated area. The nearby campground was closed for the winter, and our home was the only one occupied in the whole weekend cabin area. And, to make it worse, it was Wednesday. I reached the phone by moving along the wall, making no noise. At one point, I ended up directly beneath the window where the intruder was looking in. I caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye, by his height and the width of his shoulders. It was a man. I picked up the phone and realized there was no dial tone. In that same moment, I heard him trying to open the back door. I went still. That door had a small glass window, and I could hear his footsteps outside creaking. My head was spinning, panic clouding everything. Then I remembered my stepfather had another phone line in his office, on the other side of the house. I ran down the hallway with Julie beside me, locking the door as soon as I got inside. Thank God. That phone worked. I called the number of the house where my parents were playing cards. It was barely a kilometer away, and the sheriff's station was on the other side of the lake. I tried to explain, but I could hardly speak. Between the dogs barking and my sobbing, my stepfather didn't understand anything until I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Help! Come now, someone is trying to break in." He cut the other line. "If he gets inside, I'm going to run and hide outside." Everything was spinning. I sat on the floor under the desk, where they couldn't see me from the window. Julie positioned herself in front of me, on guard. She wasn't barking anymore, but her back was raised and her teeth were bared, a low growl vibrating in her throat. That scared me even more. It was as if she knew she had to stay quiet so she wouldn't give away where we were. A few minutes passed that felt like forever, until finally, I heard a siren. Later, I found out that several of the friends my parents were playing with were sheriff's deputies, so they responded immediately. My stepfather and one of the officers came inside to find me while two others searched outside. I was shaking. I was cold, both from fear and because the office didn't have heating. The glass in the back door was broken. There was blood. The intruder had cut himself trying to get in. The latch lock had been forced, but the upper deadbolt, the key lock, was still closed, and that was what saved me. They caught the guy the next day, when he went to a doctor to get his wound stitched. As for me, I got sick again from the shock. I guess the flu virus came back, or maybe it was just the trauma. From that night on, all the curtains were closed at dusk, without exception. Yes, I was home alone again after that, but I swore I wouldn't let fear steal my peace or my life.